So, Elon Musk apparently did a podcast with Verdict with Ted Cruz at the White House, and there is something that caught my attention. He mentioned how there are 14 magic computers located at different places that can do payment out of thin air. If you want to watch the interview, you can watch on their channel directly. So this statement of his caught not only my attention, but the news as well. I found this one in particular very interesting. So I started to show my interest about how the economy works in general back when I was still a financial agent, but this is probably the first time that made me think about how particularly the US financial system works as a whole. I mean, he said there are computers that pay out of thin air, and is that really how the financial system actually works? Isn't the Fed the one managing printing money, or in these days and age, creating credits out of thin air? I'm Daddy, and this is That Money Compass. So before I continue, I just wanted to point out that seemingly there are more and more companies deciding to move or open or invest for more manufacturers in the US, like how TSMC has decided to invest more in it to potentially avoid more tariffs repercussions. This kind of prove the understanding on tariffs that I made in the other video. You can watch somewhere over here if you haven't watched it, and you can find it in my channel. So back to how the US financial system works, I started to piece them out one by one in my head and then noting them down. Of course, if you can understand how the financial system works, you can potentially understand fully how Jerome Powell's actions may affect the current economic state, like how adjusting interest rate may affect inflation rate, but what else are saved and affected by this action, etc. So let's start with this. What kind of financial system is used by the US, right? The US uses a debt-based financial system. So money isn't backed by gold or silver anymore. It's fiat, meaning its value comes from trust in the government and economy. So a little bit of history about money used to be pegged to gold. It used to be pegged with certain ratio, meaning for an amount of money in circulation, there must be a certain amount of gold held by the banks, which let's just call it a money to gold ratio. However, to me personally, it is obvious that this way has its risk, which is bank run. It's more of just a run actually, specifically, but it works similarly, right? So just as you may have known, this risks the US went GG basically if people or countries even decided to just get gold out of US, right? In fact, it happened twice, with the first time being a close call in the 1930s and the second time in 1971. So what happened is that in the 1929, the stock market crashed. This triggered panic, and when that happens, people tend to want to go for the safe havens, and of course saving as much cold hard cash as possible, and it happened. People lost faith in banks. Mass withdrawals of gold and cash happened. Banks went GG. So just like how depositors demanded cash en masse and banks couldn't keep up, when depositors demanded gold en masse, this posed a risk on gold reserves being not able to keep up as well. So by 1933, hundreds of banks failed, and US gold stocks dropped from $4.2 billion in 1929 to under $3 billion as hoarding and outflows to Europe surged. So basically, this is how it was known as the Great Depression. So then, the US president at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, acted. So on March 1933, declared a bank holiday to stop the runs, basically. And then April 1933, ordered citizens to return the gold, to turn in the gold, basically, and paying them in paper dollars, then revalued the gold. So it's to boost the reserves back. And then June 1933, ended domestic gold convertibility. So meaning people in the country, they cannot convert the gold anymore, breaking the dollar's gold tie. Okay, But if I'm not mistaken, this only applies domestically. So certain entities still could convert, like banks and foreign countries. And this is where the second issue came later on. By the late 1960s, the US faced a slow motion bank run on its gold reserves. Vietnam War spending and Great Society programs ballooned the deficits, flooding the world with dollars. So when the foreign nations saw this, right, they had doubts because there was an increase in dollar supply, right? So especially France under de Gaulle, I hope I pronounced that correctly, smelled trouble. Basically, he lost trust and traded dollars for gold. Basically, he lost trust in a sense for the US dollars itself. So US gold naturally plummeted in terms of the reserves. 1950s was the peak, about $20 billion, 700 million ounces. And then by August 1971, so about 20 years later, it's become $10 billion while foreign dollar holdings top $50 billion. So on August 15, 1971, Nixon closed the gold window, basically suspending comfortability. So basically this Nixon president, he just said, okay, enough is enough. We are not going to peg to gold anymore. So this is when the dollar became fiat overnight, ending gold pegging thing. So why? To avoid total reserve wipeout and free the US to print money without gold shackles. I guess that's pretty much where it all began, right? So this event is also known as the Nixon shock. So that's when the new debt-based financial system came about. Afterwards, other countries kind of followed suit as they also acknowledged the limitations in pegging to gold by this point. You know, it's something like if the leading country, the US, does this, why not us as well, right? Might as well, because they themselves actually already acknowledge the limitations of pegging to gold. So yeah, you'll probably be like, debt-based financial system? What the heck do you mean? Well, I'm not gonna explain in detail in this video, otherwise it'll be super long video. Long story short, all money that we have are debts. Because for money or credits to exist, there must be debts first. So most new money enters the economy through debt. It all starts from the top. Okay, so here comes the fact. You know how there is this meme? Yeah, it starts from this. The Federal Reserve, all well known as the Fed. It just so happened that Jerome Powell is the current chair and he went through this unfortunate event since 2020 that made him the meme now. Well, a popular one though. Anyway, what is the Fed? What do they do? The Fed is the US central bank, created by the Congress in 1913 to stabilize the economy. Yes, hence you often see whenever the economy goes poo-poo, Jerome Powell comes up, right? Well, not necessarily have to be him, but more of like the Fed chair will come up. So the Fed is responsible for creating money out of thin air. Back then, yes, there was printing money, physical one, the notes, but these days it's just creating digitally. So numbers appearing in the account just like that. So the Fed manages the monetary policy, like interest rates, money supply. Yeah, I hope that kind of clears up who is in charge of money creation and what the US financial system is. Now, back to the Elon Musk stuff. I believe that he didn't mean creating money out of thin air and then pay them out, like in terms of the magic computers. It's probably more of how the federal agencies, backed by Treasury funds, kind of spend a lot freely as if there's no limit. So this can be dangerous because just like how a person uses a credit card without a limit cap, this may cause potentially huge debts or deficits in their case. And that exactly is what happened, right? Very often, agencies spend beyond the budgets allocated for them, causing deficits, which translate to DO as debts. But Daddy, how could they spend freely? Are there any budgets set? Who is responsible for that? And if they spend beyond budgets, if any, How do they cover for the extra? This is where the Treasury comes in, as well as the Fed, again, and the Congress. So the Congress is the one that's responsible for setting up budgets. So yes, there are spending budgets for federal agencies. The Treasury is the one that pays out, right? So if they don't have enough to pay, they will raise money through debts, which is selling Treasury bonds to entities like banks or foreign countries. But the Fed can also buy bonds. If they receive payments for the bonds, the money actually goes back into the Treasury. Interesting, huh? But that doesn't mean there is no limit to the spending. This is where debt ceiling comes in. Otherwise, it will be crazy, man. Like, they can just keep on spending and spending and spending and spending without any ceiling and potentially devalue the dollar, right? So if you don't know what it is, you can refer to my Instagram here for what it means. All right, so you can follow my Instagram to know more, because I do post such posts from time to time. So debt ceiling is like the cap for how much debts the US can take. Once it hits the cap, they should decide whether to raise the ceiling or not, which usually have to be raised, right? There's no way they won't raise it. Otherwise, the Treasury cannot do payments. And then part of the government will shut down, or maybe the whole government will shut down. Like, literally, because they cannot pay the workers, right? Who will work for free? Am I right? So who is responsible for raising this debt ceiling then? The Congress. By the way, US Treasury pays literally everyone in the federal government, including salaries for the president, the vice president, Congress itself, and funds for agencies like Pentagon or EPA. It's all drawn from the Treasury accounts. So you can see how serious this debt ceiling thing is. The next question naturally is, where does the money come from in the first place, right? Well, firstly, taxes, which most of you would have known by now. And secondly, borrowing, selling bonds, debts. So yeah, you would probably have heard how people, when they do protesting on the road, they will sometimes say things like, we pay the government and the government works for us. Well, this is factual, because after all, part of the taxes goes to their salaries, right? So this is where also I want to bring in tariffs and Doge a little bit, DOGE. Again, if you haven't watched my tariff video, you can watch it somewhere here. Just search for it in my channel. So how does tariffs help in this case then? Like for the earnings and its relation to the US debts, tariffs, taxes on imports, boost Treasury revenue. So it is like the US earns it, right? During Trump's first term in 2018, the tariffs actually raised $70 billion yearly. More cash means less borrowing, nudging debt down, right? But of course, unless they manage to spend within the budget, then probably there won't be any borrowing, right? But $70 billion is like a small dent, because if you compare $70 billion versus $1.7 trillion deficits at the time, it's like nothing, right? On top of that, tariffs also hike consumer prices and spark trade wars. And so it's like a double-edged sword. Helps that a bit, but it raises economic elsewhere, but of course, if it succeeds, then of course, it's a good thing, right? So this is where my concern actually comes in, because considering how Trump currently is doing more tariffs now, right? Perhaps he saw how it worked last time. So logically speaking, if he increased more tariffs, then there will be more earnings. Am I right? Maybe more than $70 billion, right? But eventually, negotiations would happen, because which country would be happy to have tariffs on them? Am I right? And when negotiations happen, there may be tariff cancellation, because once deals are made, it's a win-win situation, both parties are happy, then perhaps there won't be any tariffs anymore, right? Perhaps. So in this case, how would the US get richer then? Because, Trump like to say US will be richer because of tariffs, right? So this is probably something that we can continue monitoring as things unfold for now, right? So now for Doge, their aim is to cut waste, right? Whatever you want to call it, fraud, whatever, I'll just call it waste, right? They are doing this by trimming agency budgets or axing programs, which they have been doing, right? The effect is less spending. Well, that's natural, right? I mean, we can see that employees are getting sacked, right? So naturally, less spending, and as they cut programs, support, and all these, less spending as well, which means less borrowing, considering that again, they overspend over the budget, and this means less debt, which means slowing debt growth, right? Logically speaking. So for example, if they slash $1 trillion spending annually, it could drop from $1.7 trillion deficits to $700 billion. To be honest, this sounds very impressive, right? Because trillions, billions, these are huge amount of money, huge. However, this only slows debt growth, not erasing it, all right? Meaning, it doesn't guarantee budget surplus, because only when there is a budget surplus, then the debt can be paid, right? Like literally, you can see the debt figures going down, right? Otherwise, the figures will still keep on increasing, right? Regardless whether it's slow growth or fast growth, right? So I did a quick check, and the last surplus was in 2001 for $128 billion. Now, to be honest, this sounds quite impressive, but at this rate, I'm actually not sure if $128 billion can actually even pay the whole interest itself, let alone the capital. So yeah. But of course, after that, after 2001, it's just deficits all the way, as if it's like already a new norm. So yeah, again, I'm not a pessimistic person, but it's more of like, I just try to be real, just like how when people were so happy about the inflation rate going down and stuff like that. I remember I told an ex-colleague of mine, I was like, why are people so happy when, technically speaking, every year we have inflation going on, you know? Yeah, but there will be another story, you know what I mean? But it's something similar to that. But again, I just try to be real, because it still feels like the root cause is still there, because at the end of the day, the debt still increase, albeit at a slower pace. So something have to be done if, let's say, they really want to pay down the US debt, you get what I mean? But if you look at this point of view, which is like a combination between tariffs plus the Doge, this combination does have the potential to slow down the US debt growth. I would say potentially quite a lot, which some people already deem it as extreme at this point, which is, I mean, in terms of the US debts, right? So of course, if you can slow down the debt growth by a lot, then naturally the US debt increase can be slowed down as well. But yeah, again, the figures are, some people are already deem it very extreme. Like, I mean, you know, people like Ray Dalio, for example, right? Of course, it may result in leaner government, maybe lower interest costs, but risking short-term pain like job cuts, slower growth for long-term gain, which is less debt burden, because it is like a shock, you know, things are happening so fast and sudden, and people are not used to it. There's not even buffer days, you know, right? Like when they cut down employees and stuff like that. So it's natural that the system gets upset, because it's like suddenly something happened, it's like a shock. System get upset before it recovers, and then potentially becomes much better in the future, right? That's why Trump's also believe that, you know, it's going to be in the short term. He doesn't look at the stock market at all, and everything is actually for the long term. Anyway, to summarize, it all starts from the US financial system. The Congress will set the budgets, Treasury pays, and then agencies overspend. Treasury finds way to pay the overspending by getting into debts, selling more bonds. But overspending is not without limit. There is debt ceiling set by Congress as well, which is the cap for how much debts the US can take. And the figures for the debt have been increasing at an alarming rate. The Fed is the one that looks over the stability of the economy, They create money out of thin air, which basically is known as printing money, or more realistically is creating digital credits out of thin air, then start to stimulate the economy from ways like QE, QT, or controlling the rate. So I believe the 14 magic computers that Elon mentioned is not really the printers or the system that is responsible for creating credits out of thin air. So yeah, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do, please consider leaving a like and share it because it can help this channel out tremendously. And if you have any topics that you want me to cover, do leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to drink up, stay hydrated, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.